Well, I'm delighted to be here with Shia LaBeouf today. And you and I met several months ago when you were up in my pastoral region working with the Capuchins to prepare for this extraordinary role you played of Padre Pio. Mm-hmm. So I ran into you up there one day. Mm-hmm. And I just saw you a few weeks ago when you were premiering the movie for some of the Capuchins. So delighted you're here today to talk to us.
I'm honored to be here.
Good. And I could talk to you all day about a lot of things, but maybe first a bit about acting. I mean, you're seen as one of the best actors in your generation. And when I watch your films, I'm reminded of people like, De Niro and Pacino and Daniel Day-Lewis and some of these people who are more identified with, the method acting style, Stanislavski and all that. I'm just wondering, I mean, do you agree with that? Would you say you're kind of a method actor? And if so, what's involved in that?
I think people put that on me, but and I'm honored by the people you just mentioned to be included that way or be perceived that way. Yeah. But one, I'm not at that level. One, two, I'm not in that school of thought. So Stanislavski is about sense memory and it's very intellectual. It's a whole lot of conceptual. It's a whole lot of cognitive. It's heady. It's very heady. And I'm like a Whitman character. I'm like a very unintellectual feeler. And so I don't identify with that school of thought really. I don't really know what I do or where it comes from or how it happens. I know that I feel a whole lot. I got a big heart. I don't know if I'm a method guy. And I think some of that stuff's ridiculous.
So kind of the staying in character, that's sort of the cliche.
I like to be immersive.
Yeah.
I like all immersive experience, not just acting. It's probably why I like Catholicism as well. I like all immersion. I like I like adventure. And that requires like full immersion. So I would consider myself an immersive actor, but method acting has like a bad smell to it.
Like too technical, too intellectual.
And just kind of douchey, kind of like just like mean.
Mean.
Yeah. Sometimes I feel like there's people on film sets like it gives some people an excuse to behave terribly. Yeah, okay. You hear some stories of guys just like sending people like rat carcasses and like ridiculous things that have nothing to do with the moment on set.
What's the famous Olivier story that he was with Dustin Hoffman, right? And Hoffman stayed up all night and to get totally into his character. And didn't Olivier say like,
why don't you just try acting, my
son?
dear boy?
It's a lot easier.
Well, yeah, and this is tricky because both of those actors are incredible. Who would you side with? Me personally, I appreciate Hoffman more, and maybe that's just because of my generation. But I don't think it's required to. First off, I now having played Pio, some of the penitence involved in method is interesting because then you're not acting. I hate acting. I hate acting because it feels like you can get it wrong when you're really in it. Then you can't get it wrong. I hate losing, I like to win. And so there's ways to like backstop a performance where you leave yourself very little room for error if you're in the middle of it, If you show up with all the caps, it's easier to believe and that you're a part of that because you showed up with it equally. If you're playing a gangster and you roll in with gangsters, it feels the same way. Whereas the make-believe stuff feels like frivolous and unintrinsic and like wishy-washy.
So say a bit about your own preparation then. So not the intellectual Stanislavski thing, but this immersive, entering into the emotion of it. Tell me more about that. You're preparing to play Padre Pio. What's involved in that?
Yeah, because Stanislavski's like therapy. It's like therapizing, right? Which is really heady. Yeah. And let's focus on childhood trauma and the problems and things like that. Pio, right? So you wind up with this enormous responsibility, and you learn how enormous it is the further in you go, and you start to get very scared, and that fear motivates, like all things, fear and discomfort motivates like growth and change, and so I get this. I'm tasked with this enormous thing, which feels like. And this is a whole story in itself, how the role even came to me, but which also feels miraculous and unearned anyway, I wind up with this task, and the task is to play like one of the most spiritual men that ever lived. You're playing one of the most respected, beloved saints that ever graced the earth. some people in Italy don't carry a Jesus on them; they carry a Pio on them.
Yeah, right.
You go to certain places in Italy, and he's everywhere. He's Elvis, and I mean that in the best way. And you recognize rightly that this is more than a role. That this is Pio's interesting. Because Pio also saved my life. I mean, it's not just like a movie or something like that. And I don't mean that lightly.
Let's hang on to that. I want to get back to that, of course.
Okay.
I want to ask you maybe one more thing about acting.
If you like immersive experiences and you get tasked with playing Pio, your life is going to change.
Well, I see that, for sure. That happened to you.
Yeah.
Here's what I want to ask you about, though. Actors have been fascinating to us from ancient times. It's not like a Hollywood thing. It goes all the way back to ancient times. The people loved actors. They find them fascinating. For some reason, people that can play other people, we find compelling. And then even like the ancient philosophers were very interested in acting and theater,
Can I interject for 1 second?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just to say that Mass is a bit of a performance.
Yeah.
Mass, the priest is performing the last moments of Christ's life, and he is a vessel for this extraordinary experience, this extraordinary moment in time, and he is replaying as he's as the host is imbued with the Spirit, that is a bit of a performance. And so different priests have different performances. And there's not to say a priest is an actor, because that somehow minimizes the sacred nature of the task, but there is a correlation between Mass and being an actor completely immersed in an immersive experience. That was my first inroad to Pio, was, okay, that Mass is an immersive experience. He's fully involved. His Mass was very different than other Masses that were performed, in that it was lively. It was, you never knew which way it was going to go.
We have some films of those. We've seen Padre Pio sing Mass.
And it's an emotional experience. It's not just the tradition of it. It's not just the ritual of it. It's an entire journey that he goes through. He's exhausted at the other end. He's sweating. He's dripping. He's crying.
Yeah.
There's snot. It's like the man went to battle. He went to war, and it feels like there's a death that happens and a resurrection, and it's extremely emotional, which is how he touched people. He didn't touch people through like these profundities that he spit. He was also an immense feeler. A lot of his contemporaries didn't liken him to an Aquinas or an intellectual. He was an extraordinary feeler. He was like a pro-feeler. And that was my first inroad to him, was the fact that I as an actor who feels that way, that I'm not like I didn't go to school. I didn't go to Juilliard. I'm just like a street tough who wound up in this wild world. And in Pio, I found the same kind of misanthrope who wound up in this wild situation where a lot of people put a lot of pressure on him, and he felt the enormous nature of the task. That was my first inroad.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for speaking too much.
No, here's a lot of things were going through my mind as you were talking. One is, I heard Bruce Springsteen say one time that his first introduction to performing was being an altar server. So he's in his Catholic parish, he's an altar boy, and he said, there you are up on this stage that's well lit, and there's people out there, and you're dressed up, and he said it was like my first introduction to performance. I also thought of Thomas Merton, you know that name?
Oh,
the
yeah.
spiritual writer.
Oh, yeah.
So Merton had all these friends in New York who were not Catholic, and he becomes a Trappist monk, which is a pretty, intense expression of Catholicism. So a lot of them came to his first Mass, and they didn't quite know what was going on. So one of his buddies, a guy named Seymour Friedgood, who was Jewish, said, what is the Mass? And Merton said, well, it's like a ballet with certain prescribed movements and gestures. Now that was the pre-conciliar Mass, the older Mass, which probably is a little bit more like that, but it's to your point about the performance of it or the drama of it, because it is a sort of recapitulation of the drama of Christ's life. Even the priest coming into the sanctuary, the word entering into flesh, coming into the world, the priest being relatively silent for the first part of Mass, the quiet, the silent years of Jesus. Then the proclamation of the word, that's Jesus preaching. Then there's the sacrifice of Calvary, et cetera. So the Mass is if you want, a dramatic representation of the life and death and resurrection of Jesus.
Also, when Mass is done really, really well, you feel like a secret is being shared with you. And good performances are this way. When you see really good performances, you feel like, oh, wow, this person is sharing a secret with me. It connects in something deeper where you feel like somebody is expressing something from in you and you're seeing it up on screen. And that's what I get out of really good Mass. A really good Mass feels like it's sharing some secret with me, some profound secret with me. Not to get too corny or anything like that, but that's what it...
Let me ask you about that, because that was my question about the philosophers. And I won't get too technical, don't worry about that. But like Aristotle said, theater is cathartic. And what he meant was, that means just like cleansing. Catharsis means like a purification. As I watched the actors on stage, he thought, and especially it was pity and fear and sorrow, these deep emotions we have, that we kind of act them out with the actors and we sort of deal with them. And we post-Freudian people get that too, of like deep emotions in us that might be suppressed, but they're coming out as we're watching a great film or a great play. I mean, do you see that, or what's happening when you're watching a really good movie beyond just entertainment?
Yeah, you're activated. It's probably why Mass has changed. The Mass has changed because there was a yearning to activate the public in an artificial way. I would say, I mean, listen, I'm no expert on any of this, but it feels like this bureaucratic activation, like rules were set or a change happened in the tradition from Latin Mass to the Mass that you now receive at a traditional Catholic church. It's almost as though the church is trying almost from the office, activate the audience without putting the agency on the priest.
We have full, conscious, active participation. That's
which is where the
line of
singing and the
Vatican
back
II.
and forth comes
Right.
from, whereas old Latin Mass put all the agency on the priest to be fully activated, and that activation of the priest was supposed to activate the audience, activate the laity. That all the agency was put on the priest. And so, and I don't want to get too far into this because then you get into controversy, but Latin Mass affects me deeply. And,
How come?
Because it feels like they're not selling me a car. And when I go to some Mass with the guitars and stuff, and I'm from, Santa Ynez, right? So that's where I was catechized. And there's a lot of guitar playing. And there's a lot of like, what feels like they're trying to sell me on an idea.
Yeah.
Whereas what I feel when I went to Oakland and went to like, and by the way, there's a very incredible version of that as well. That's super activating and very emotional that I've experienced up there with Father Bobby. There's also, and Father Peter, but there's also this something that happened, Christ the King in Oakland does a Latin Mass every day of the week. And it feels like it's not being done to sell me on anything. And it feels almost like I'm being let in on something very special. And the quiet, it activates something in me where it feels like I found something. It's a little bit like a band. When a band is pushed on you, it doesn't feel the same way as you finding it. When you find it, then you root for it. It feels like this special thing that you found, and you protect it, and you hold it, and it's yours. When somebody's selling me on something, it somehow takes it kills my aptitude for it and my suspension of disbelief and my yearnings to root for it.
I get it.
There's an immediate rebellion in me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I get that. You're hitting different dimensions of it, because you might say the shadow side of the older form was it became too much of a theater performance and the audience is just kind of sitting there taking it in, where what all the liturgical reform people wanted, this is way back in the 40s and 50s, was this full, conscious, active participation. So that the congregation is not like just watching a show, but we're involved. You say the give and take and so on. But then the shadow side of the other approach, I think you're right in saying I can feel too put upon, like they're, as you say, trying to sell me something.
Yes.
And, so trying to find that organic rhythm.
Because you don't want to be exclusive either.
No, right.
Which is what Latin Mass feels like sometimes. It feels like I have to know Latin to experience it. But however, I would also say that there's certain language where I don't need to know the words.
Yeah.
Which is what I feel when I watch Pio's Mass.
Yeah.
I know what's going on, and I feel it deeply. It almost feels more powerful than when I know every single word. It takes me out of the realm of the intellectual, and it puts me squarely in the realm of the feeling, and the beauty thing that you talk about.
Do you know Joseph Campbell? Do you know that name? The
Yes.
comparative mythologist. And he was raised as a Catholic way back when, so in the old church, right? He said he thought the greatest problem was when we moved the Mass from the older form, and he said to make it more like a cooking demonstration. And what he meant was, well, here we are, everything's well lit. I'm this and this and that. And I get his point. It's kind of the point you're making, that if it becomes too obvious, too rationalized, hey everybody, look, here's what's going on, that it does take something away
Yeah.
from the experience of
Yeah.
the mystique of it. Because part of the idea of using incense, which we do at the Catholic Mass, and we say, well, our prayers going up to God, yes, indeed. But part of the symbolism there is it blocks our vision. The smoke gets
Yes.
in the way.
Yes.
And in fact, it gets in your eyes even.
Yes.
Where people are coughing and I can't see. But that's appropriate around sacred things. If everything's wide open to view and under bright light, oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Well, that's by definition not the sacred in a way.
Yeah.
So, see, the challenge to me is trying to find a way to honor all these things we're talking about. And the liturgical wars going on are often people on both sides seeing good things in their approach. But it's trying to find the place where they can all find expression.
Yeah.
I think that's the
Yeah.
challenge.
And I do, I mean, as a person who's involved in the arts, to deny some of the senses, it heightens some of the others. So,
Yeah.
so when
Yeah,
you
yeah.
put me in this rationalistic,
Right.
logical, word, plot, it takes me out of the feeling realm.
Yeah.
Whereas Latin Mass puts me squarely in the feeling realm because I can't argue the word, because I don't know what the word means.
Yeah.
So I'm just left with this feeling that feels sacred and connected. And really what hindered I was never an atheist. I was always an agnostic, even when I was a Sam Harris, TED Talk, Christopher Hitchens guy, which is who I was before I fell in. I always had a belief, but I never had like a connection. Latin Mass gave me something where I felt connected, which took me out of belief into connection. Belief kept me, I had belief because that's the rational, logical. It's not logical or rational to be atheist. If you really go deep enough, you get to the Big Bang and then you're screwed again. You have to account for it somehow, which puts you in a belief situation.
Right.
But too much of that logic and too much of that rationale takes me out of feeling, which takes me out of connection.
No, and it's a good instinct, because Catholicism, I think part of our genius is we never threw anything out. That we have kind of this all-encompassing thing. You want rationality, man, you got Thomas Aquinas, and he's more rational than anyone in the whole Western tradition. But then that same Thomas Aquinas, who could write in a highly, highly technical way, they say couldn't get through Mass without weeping copiously.
Yeah.
And so that's Catholicism, is that we've got the emotion, we've got the art, we've got the sensible, we've got the intellectual, and it's all there. We never threw anything away, And so, because people are in different places. When I was a young kid, I responded to Aquinas' arguments. They made a huge difference to me. Like, wow, that is really rationally compelling. Other people respond in very different ways. I responded differently at different stages of my life when I got through that, and then other things opened up to me, So I love that we've got this house with all these doors that are open, and, whatever door works for you, come on in.
Well, Merton is really interesting because he's a poet, and he speaks really rationally, but his writings are, and he was an atheist. So if you walk in and you were me reading, Seven Story Mountain, he spoke to every part of me. He was a big deal for me. Him and...
he was for me too.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that you had read, so you read the Seven Story Mountain.
It was sort of required if you were going to play Pio, I was told. He was a big deal.
Very interesting.
Yeah, the guys who catechized me, all the guys at San Lorenzo gave me him and Jim Townsend. Jim Townsend was a Capuchin who formerly was a con man. He was a convict. He had murdered his pregnant wife and then spent 20 years in prison and then spent 35 years in the seminary, or 35 years in the order.
In the order, yeah.
And he was another invite for a person who felt totally depraved when I walked in. I walked into this, my life was on fire. I was walking out of hell. It wasn't like I willingly came in here on a white horse singing show tunes. I came in here on fire, and I didn't want to be an actor anymore, and my life was a mess, complete mess, and I had hurt a lot of people, and I felt deep shame and deep guilt. I didn't like to go outside much. I had a yearning not be here anymore. I was on my way out.
Is that where you were when you accepted the role of Padre Pio?
This is why when you spoke about the role, I wanted to kind of dive in there because it's kind of formative to how this all happened to me. I was willing, because pain made me willing to go about this in a different way than I had previously. My opinion about God before this happened, before the pain struck, before my world had crumbled, was art, love, and God, they all mean the same thing. They're synonymous. And as an artist who creates art, I found myself in a godly position often, right? Where I was in charge. And I had also been told my whole life, like, your life is your life. You have to make with it what you can, you know? You got to be a good guy, and then you got to get married, and then you got to get a house, and you got to get a job and do good at your job. And like, your life is your life, and things will work out if you put effort in, and, you know, it's up to you. And I always really felt that. And it made it hard to believe in God, because it felt like my managerial skills are what are going to amount to a fulfilled existence.
Yeah.
When all of my designs failed, when all of my plans went out the window, when my life had led to serious infliction of pain and damage on other people, I threw up my hands like, my plans are garbage, and I don't want to be here anymore, and that was required to enter PO. You had to actually, it's why it feels like celestial mathematics or some kind of divine, it feels way, too coincidental to be a coincidence. But my life was completely, like I told you, on fire, and I'm in a spiritual program where I go on Zoom, and we have meetings, and another person that was in this meeting, who's also part of this same fellowship of like the down and outs, was a man named Abel Ferreira. And he wound up seeing me in the meeting. We shared sensibilities. We had heard each other share a few times, and then he wrote me in the chat box, "Do you know about Padre Pio?" And of course, I didn't know anything about Padre Pio.
This is before the offer of the film. It's just, okay.
This had been gestating on his side for years, because his grandfather comes from the same region in Pietrelcina, and he has a connection to Pio in many different ways. He's not a Catholic, he's a Buddhist, which I always had trouble with as a person who was always self, and now, I'm not going to get into that conversation, but me and him have wrestled over this many times. And I thought, okay, well, what is this Padre Pio thing? And this is early days in my what now looks like a salvific journey from my side.
Yeah.
I was still egotistical on max. I was still grasping at straws. How do I hold on to what I've lost? How do I build a career again? And so when this director who I respected, I had known he made movies that I really loved. Bad Lieutenant for me is one of the greatest performances ever made, and I know he's an actor's director, and the fact that there was this director reaching out to me, because at this point I'm nuclear. Nobody wants to talk to me, including my mother. The manager's not calling, the agent's not calling. I'm not connected to the business anymore. And so the fact that this man reached out to me felt like something like, in my egoic mind, wow, this is a miracle.
This is my chance.
This is my chance. Yeah. And so my ego shows up. And now I'm like, yeah, well, Padre Pio. And my ego is what makes me research Pio. It's not my Catholicism or my yearnings towards God.
So you thought this would be a cool role for me to play.
Great, now I can get back on the horse.
Yeah, okay.
And so I start researching Pio. And as I'm researching Pio, he tells me about his plans to make a movie, and he tells me that Willem Dafoe is going to be in the movie. And now I'm really in ego. Wait, so I can go from bottom barrel to working with Willem Dafoe? This is my chance, back on the hustle, back on the ego.
Yeah.
And I start leaning into this thing, and he says, well, if you want to do this role, I need you to start researching. Go up and find I need you to go find a seminary, a Catholic
that's when
seminary.
you made your way up to San Lorenzo.
So the closest seminary to me,
Yeah.
living in Pasadena, was San Lorenzo. So
Yeah.
I drive up there, and I park my truck, and I start living in the parking lot. And I'm immersing myself in this world, and I'm sending videos back to Willem and Abel, who at the time were, working on the script, and I'm falling into a group of men that met me in San Lorenzo, namely a guy named Brother Jude, who starts talking to me about the gospel. And he says, well, if you're going to play Pio, you need to read the gospel. And so I'd never read the gospel, and he's reading Matthew to me.
So you'd never read the Gospel of Matthew straight through? Yeah, okay.
I've read all Sam Harris. I've watched all the TED Talks.
Yeah, right.
And was really good at attacking Catholicism because it made me feel superior. It made
you
me feel
kind of agnostic/atheist at the time.
Yes, I'd like to argue because it made me feel like I was in power.
Right. Yeah.
I'd like to be contrarian.
Yeah.
I like to sit with a bishop and then put you on your heels because that would make me feel powerful.
Right.
Which I find most secular people enjoy, the control of it.
Yeah.
Because so much of life is uncontrollable, to feel in control feels good. So I was that guy. I come up with these arguments. My mother had a spirituality that was sort of undefined.
She was Jewish, right? Your mother?
Yeah, but like hippie Jewish, like not like traditional Jewish according to the Testament. My mother had never read the Old Testament. Okay. She was Jewish in culture. She liked the art. She liked being a part of it. She liked the rabbis and the charisma, but she wasn't a practicing Jew in that she wore tefillin and read the Old Testament. And I had never been given any of this information. I've been bar mitzvahed phonetically. I read the Hebrew phonetically. So it felt like a show. It felt like a hustle.
You didn't know what you were saying.
I didn't know what I was saying. And in that way, it felt, and it wasn't emotional. It felt like I was doing it for my grandmother, who at that time was on her last leg, and I was told I needed to get bar mitzvah for my grandmother.
And you were like 13 at the time? At the
13,
age,
and I read it phonetically, and my grandmother's happy, and they put me on a chair, and that's my spirituality for a long time. And it felt fake, because I never invested, I had never felt any real suffering in my life, so I didn't have any willingness to have any belief, so I had no faith. Okay, so that's the...
So now you're up at San Lorenzo, and you're given the Gospel of Matthew.
I'm reading
it for the first time.
I read it for the first time, and things start to strike me, like John the Baptist.
Yeah, okay.
Like the story of John the Baptist, being a reformed hedonist, being this man who was wearing like this, who was sort of like, scraggly and like kind of felt like a old Western character from some kind of I don't know, like he felt like a cowboy.
Eating locust and wearing
he felt like kind of rustic and strong and masculine. And my opinion of Christ at this point felt almost like I was reading about a Buddhist, like this very soft, fragile, all loving, all listening, but no ferocity, no romance.
Then you hadn't read the Gospel.
I hadn't read the Gospel
at that point.
I just had this art that I had seen of like this very soft,
more feminized.
Jesus. Yes. And so I hadn't had this idea of like the Old Testament, Christ on a horse, cape, dipped in blood, sword. I had none of that was in my lexicon of knowledge. So all I knew about was this very soft, meek Jesus, which didn't fit into my idea of what masculinity would be. I come from my dad was a Mongol biker, it's like it wasn't appealing to me. And then I read about John the Baptist, and it became quite appealing. The grizzle.
Yeah, right.
And then you get further into the gospel, and you start getting into like elements of this like redemptive. It felt like I started reading about a route. I started like reading a map, towards something that felt like let go. That's really what I got out of the Gospels. If I could wrap it up in 2 words, it was let go. And at that time when I was reading it, I was holding on so tight to a life that I was slipping away through my hands, to 35 years of management, that the Gospel gave me this invite to just let go. What never was appealing to me about Buddhism was this idea, like, if I'm in a boat and the boat is sinking and I don't know how to swim, Buddhism is a book that tells you, and read this and learn how to swim better. And at the time in my life, like, I didn't want to swim anymore. I had a gun on the table. I was out of here. I didn't want to be alive anymore when all of this happened, okay? Shame like I had never experienced before. Kind of shame, you forget how to breathe. You don't know where to go. You can't go outside to get like a taco. Like, you don't want to go anywhere.
And that's where you are when you're up there reading the Gospel and thinking about playing Padre Pio. You're in that state.
Yes, but I'm also in this deep desire to like hold on.
Yeah.
And so I read the Gospel with this man, Jude, and I keep hearing like in many different variations of it. I'm not going to explain the whole Gospel here, nor do I need to. It's you. But I keep hearing let go. Mm-hmm. And to a person who's been gripping so tight for so long, it feels like, it just feels like, it just feels like the right move to let go, like complete surrender for real. And it stops being this like prep of a movie, and it starts being something that feels beyond all that. And I stop sending videos. Like at a certain point with Jude, I just like really fall in. And then I meet these women, Sister Lucia of the Sacred Heart Sisters, who starts really like catechizing me in a very real way, in a very like, let's go through it, let's talk about it paragraph by paragraph. And what happened was, there also happened to be like a meeting at the church for this other spiritual program that I'm in, right next door to Sister Lucia's. So I'd wake up in the morning, 9 a.m., I'd go to my meeting, and then 10 a.m. I'd be with Sister Lucia, and then 11 a.m. I'd be with Brother Jude, and then 12 I'd be with Father James, who's now in Burnley. But Father James was like this. Father James felt like an old sheriff. Right. I don't know if you met Father James.
Sure, yeah.
He's like a grandfather.
Right.
His hand is enormous.
Yeah.
He made me feel safe. He would just put his hand on my shoulder sometimes. and he wouldn't say much to me. He wasn't, but he was also like this Archie Bunker character, where like his love felt like you had to, like you were pulling it out of him.
Yeah.
But he's always around, and I started falling into this group, and I'm living there, so I'm taking showers in there, and I'm eating with them, and we're hanging out,
And they're drawing you into the Christian, the Catholic thing. They're kind of drawing you into the gospel, into a certain way of life.
But more than that, it's not even like they're drawing me into like laughter. They're like sharing jokes with me. It's like we're just like hanging out. And at this time, I had no friends in my life.
What did Jesus do with people when he first met them, typically? He'd eat and drink with them. So you think of Jesus, well, he's giving the Sermon on the Mount. Well, yes, he does. But the typical move of Jesus was, well, let's get around the table and we'll talk.
Yeah.
And he's talking to prostitutes and sinners and tax collectors, and so that move of theirs, to kind of draw you in.
Yeah.
Draw you into their life.
Yeah, and I'm eating their ice cream, and I'm eating them out of house and home, and I'm filling the tacos back up, but like I'm really like, they're not asking nothing of me. They're not asking me to sign nothing. They're not asking me to do nothing or take pictures. I'm just like sitting around, and I'm petting their cats, and I'm hanging out,
Yeah, right. But the lesson of, as you put it, let go, was coming through.
Yeah, that's all I kept hearing.
But not just let go, but reach out, right, to someone who's reaching out to you.
The reach out had happened for me.
Yeah.
I was already there. I had nowhere to go. This was the last stop on the train. There was nowhere else to go. In every sense, it was like, I know now, like my God was using my ego to draw me to him, was drawing me away from worldly desires. It was all happening simultaneously, but there would have been no impetus for me to get in the car and drive up here if I didn't think, oh, I'm gonna save my career. And what happened to me when I got here is a switch happened. It was like 3-card Monty. It was like somebody tricked me into it.
Yeah.
It felt like. Not in a bad way, in a way that like I couldn't see it. I was so close to it, I couldn't see it. I see it differently now because time has passed. And anyway, so I'm hanging with Brother Jude, and then Brother Jude gets called away, and he has to go like be an archivist somewhere. So he's got no time for me. And another man enters the fray named Brother Alex, and Brother Alex has a totally different energy.
Young guy, he's about your age.
He's my age.
Yeah.
Super austere.
Yeah.
Very prayerful.
Yeah.
And I don't know nothing about prayer because I can't cultivate an unforgiving. I don't know anything about silence. I don't know anything about quiet. I don't know anything about it. I got a cell phone in my phone that will give me everything my ego needs. It's buzzing all the time. I got all this, there is no silence, or I don't know anything about meditation. Meditation at this point in my life feels like a self-imposed timeout. Prayer feels like I'm memorizing somebody else's words, like I'm an actor, like I'm doing monologues for myself in my head. And Alex says, just go into that chapel and just shut up.
Where the Blessed Sacrament is.
Yes,
Yeah.
and just sit there. Just sit there and be quiet. And that feels like a very strange thing to tell me, and I'm also rebelling. And right around this time, you and the deacons show up for like this deacons meeting.
Well, that's the first time I met you.
It's the first time I meet you.
Okay.
The deacons are all hanging out at the church.
Right.
And I feel like, oh, this is like, wow, it's amazing. I get to sit in here, and I feel like I'm not allowed to be there. But then all the deacons are like being really warm with me, and I'm sitting in the back.
It was Mass first, right?
It's Mass.
Then,
We do Mass, and then we go like have a little sandwich.
Right.
And you do this talk about prayer.
Yeah.
And how it's really a simple 4-step process, prayer, and I needed somebody to simplify it for me, because it felt like, one, I needed it to be defined. I didn't want it to be this esoteric. I needed something very defined and very practical. I needed something very like boots on the ground. And you said, quiet leads to loving thoughts leads to loving action leads to peace. And that hit me heavy.
It was Mother Teresa I was quoting there. That's
whoever it was, it's changed my life. So then you go into pray rosary.
Yeah.
And I'm just learning rosary at this time. I know the front half. I don't know all the prayers. I can do, I can get to the middle of the rosary. I don't know the dismount prayers, but I have enough to like, it pauses my head, which I guess what rosary does for a lot of people. It makes it tactile.
It's a great prayer, right?
It takes me out of the cognitive and it puts me into the physical. It physicalizes it. And for somehow that pauses all of my internal nonstop chitter chatter monologuing of what I want, what I need, and this animal in me.
It calms the monkey mind. That was Merton's line that he got from the Buddhists, actually. The monkey mind's always leaping around.
Yes.
Here, and it calms that. It calms that and centers it.
Yeah, and makes me feel present because it's right here.
Right.
I can hold it.
You hold it in your hand.
Yeah.
Right.
And so we're praying the rosary, and I'm waiting for loving thoughts, and it's not my first or second or third or fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh thought. But then I hear a thought like, call your mother, tell her you love her. Now, me and my mother at this time, my mother don't want nothing to do with me. You know, the news that had come out has been like I've been abusive to women, and I've been shooting dogs, and I've been willingly giving women STDs, and like it's disgusting. It's depraved. And my mother is embarrassed beyond all imagination. She doesn't want nothing to do with me. And we hadn't talked, and I'm living in this parking lot. And I get out of rosary with you, and I call my mother, and I say, I don't have much to say to you, but I love you and I'm safe. And she said, oh, I'm so grateful. And she hangs up the phone, and it's the first time I had really like talked to my mother, and I felt this peace, because I had all this resentment and animosity, like, how could you dip on me? You're my mother. You know, no matter what happens, like, this is conditional love that you offer me. So, you know, then I start reading the Confessions by Augustine and his mother and that relationship. And like, everything starts to feel like click, 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 click.
Right.
And Augustine being like a hedonist who had made all these flaws. And then they started explaining Francis to me and all this ego that was in Francis. Just a complete egomaniac.
Same story, right.
Yeah, like, and I start feeling all these connections, and I start seeing this route. And and it says let go, and I find a way for myself. This is all before we're even in the movie. I'm not even reading the script yet. I'm just like laying the ground, I'm not even in a Pio yet. I'm passing Pio's statue every day, and I'm kissing him on the hand just out of like reverence for the statue. Yeah. But I don't know anything about the man yet. Then I get to reading about Pio and about suffering. Now, this is another hack that happens to me at some point, where I felt like my suffering was pointless. I didn't understand what was going on. I felt like, you know, and Father James walks me through like offering your suffering up as a purposeful. As like intrinsically valuable, that God taps certain people to go through certain suffering so that they can be more effective at bringing the good news forward. And we start talking about purpose. And I'm questioning like what my purpose is, because before this moment, my purpose was just to be a good actor. My purpose was just to be the best actor. That was my whole purpose in life, like just such a little dream, like the dream of an ant. Yeah. And James says, you know, what are you good at? And I'm like, I'm good at bleeding in front of people. He's like, what are you talking about? I was like, well, that's what I do. You know, I sort of just throw myself at walls. They film me. People tell me it's good. That's all I know how to do. He's like, okay, so you're good at suffering. How are you going to help other people with that? I was like, I guess I'll make movies and stuff. And he's like, yeah, but what else? And we start getting deep off into this conversation and what the arithmetic of purpose is. And James says, you find out what you're good at first. You find out how you can help other people with that, and that is your purpose. Yeah. And that's the leapfrog.
Right. I mean, there's so many spiritual principles that you're talking about. And what's cool to me is you were learning them not abstractly, not from a book. You were living through them, and you had some good people guiding you. But, you know, one of them is the whole attachment, detachment thing, which every spiritual master talks about. I mean, ancient, medieval, modern, every master, is you got to hunger for God. We all do. Which is infinite hunger. It's what everybody wants. Sam Harris wants it, trust me. But we hook it on to something in this world. So we say it's wealth, it's power, it's pleasure, it's my career, it's whatever it is. It's going to make me happy. And of course it can't, because the desire is infinite. So it can't be filled up by anything.
Yeah, there's no ceiling.
Right. So you keep throwing things in, more and more and more and more. And of course it doesn't work. And that's how we get addicted, which is, I think, why attachment in the classical spiritual masters is very much like addiction today, that we know a lot about, that we get addicted to these things. And you're addicted to sex or to booze or to drugs or to success or to my own ego, all that stuff, you know. So you would wander down that path.
I was wearing a success mask for 30 years.
But see, it's like the, did you ever see this thing? It was Jim Carrey. It was a really funny little routine he did. It was at the Golden Globes, and he gets up and he said, this is not just Jim Carrey speaking to you. This is two-time Golden Globe winner Jim Carrey. And then he said, what I dream about at night is that someday I will be three-time Golden Globe winner, and then the quest will be over. And they all laugh, but it was perfect. It was a perfect little parody of that problem, you know? Yeah. So you're in there, and I'm thinking of Chesterton. You know, G.K. Chesterton, have you read him at all? He has that wonderful line from one of his Father Brown stories, you know, these detective stories. And that God will let us drift to the end of the world, but then by a twitch upon the thread, will call us back, you know? And so you're talking about having wandered a long way, but then this twitch on the thread came, and it was this whole weird Padre Pio movie. And then these people whom I know, everyone you talk about, I know these guys very well. And strangely, they weren't trying to get something out of you. I mean, you had nothing to really offer them.
Nothing to offer them.
But they were just there to say, okay, you know, we're going to draw you into our world here just by our friendship and laughter. Then we're going to draw you a little
If they didn't do it for fun and for free, I'd have never heard anything they said. I wouldn't have heard word one.
Right.
Because I would have ripped them apart because, oh, this is a transaction and you're doing it because of this and that and this and that.
Yeah, like Father James, who I know very well, if someone said, oh, this guy, he's a pretty famous actor, and, you know, if you get to, he's like, I don't care.
He didn't care at all.
He wouldn't care at all.
No, he didn't care at all.
No, and that's what made him a powerful.
Yes.
And what he said to you, that's the move now from addiction, and then we reach out to the Lord, not to the things of the world. But then the next move is always mission. So he's like, okay, why did he call you back with a twitch upon the thread?
Yeah.
Why? So that now he can send you out on mission. You know, so that's James saying to you, okay, what are you good at? Well, how can you use it?
Yes.
You know.
But James is also a big Pio guy. Right. And he keeps saying to me, like, don't make him weak.
Yeah.
Like, meek and weak are two different things.
No, right.
And let me explain the difference to you between being meek and being weak. Meek is to be treasured. Meek is to be valued. Meek is a submissive respect. Mm-hmm. Weak is having no faith. And he starts explaining stuff like that to me, where, you know, meek in my head, from a kid who never had a puberty ceremony. I mean, you know, Judaism, and you're 13 and they put you on a chair and you get a driver's license, but it's not like I wander off into the woods and come back with a lion's head. You know, there's no puberty ceremony for a young man today.
You know, that's a problem in our culture.
Yes.
We've forgotten how to do that.
And you don't really know what it is to be a man, you know? And James starts talking about mountains. You know, this is where Seven Story Mountain comes about, but we were in a conversation about a mountain, about what in nature is masculine. And I'm like, and he says mountain, and he says, do you know why? He goes, because it's immovable. You know, the wind is not going to move a mountain. And then we start talking about my wife and what my wife wants in a man, and being stable, and where that stability comes from for a man, and that it's not going to be something you will. It's going to be something you lean on. And that mountain is in that chapel. This is like my journey to this. He starts
brought you back to the Blessed Sacrament.
Yeah, but he does it like through this rah-rah cowboy talk. You know, I feel like I'm listening to like I don't know what to describe it as, but it feels like John Wayne. It's like this rah-rah kind of thing that touched on it touched on this thing that I came from, and it accounted for this whole side of this Christ that I didn't know yet. And he sort of like masculinized the whole thing for me as this warrior's journey. And he starts reading like Heraclitus to me. I don't know anything about Heraclitus, but he's like, there's this quote I want to read to you. And he goes, you know, Heraclitus talks about what a warrior is. He says, and I'm paraphrasing, but he says, you know, out of 100 men, 80 are just targets. 10 are fighters because 10 are fighters because they make for the battle and we're grateful for them. But the one is a warrior, and he will bring the others back. And, you know, I'm starting to have like emotional experiences with this guy in this, you know, with these cats running around, we're eating ice cream, and I'm having like emotional experiences with him, explaining Heraclitus and like this thing that I hadn't had before, which felt like a task, more than me, more than just like myself. And it was also like tapping into this other program that I come from. And so now I'm starting to share, like, in this other program on Zoom, like, these guys are seeing me in a parking lot, and they're seeing these friars walk behind me.
What is going on?
And they're desperate for God over here as well. You know, that whole thing is about finding a higher power. And so they're seeing me, like, hang out at this seminary, and they start driving up. And the guys start...
Is that right?
Yeah, these guys that are in this other program start driving up to the seminary and start hanging out with these other friars, and my world sort of collides. And then, oh man, where are we in the story? But
well, you've come a long way spiritually at that point.
Yes.
I mean, you've
now I'm experiencing prayer. I'm experiencing rosary. I'm starting to learn Mass really well. I'm starting to be a part of Mass. I'm starting to feel the effect of Mass. I'm not receiving the host yet because we weren't sure if I was baptized or not. And so I couldn't receive yet, and I felt this deep longing. I didn't know I was baptized. I had been baptized earlier in my life and didn't even remember it.
Yeah.
My uncle was had baptized me in Trinitine. I'm saying it wrong.
The Trinitarian formula?
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And so then we found out that I could receive Mass and started receiving Mass, and I start feeling like this deep reprieve. It's not just like a cracker anymore. I start feeling a physical effect from it. I start feeling a reprieve, and it starts feeling like regenerative, and I start enjoying it to such a degree I don't want to miss it ever. And then I start going to other masses in different parts of the city. I wind up at San Lorenzo, and doing Liturgy of the Hours with them, which feels like a bigger version of what I'm experiencing in Santa Ynez at Mass. I'm feeling it. I'm feeling more reprieve, feeling safety, which is really what I'm chasing, like this safety. And I'm feeling it with these brothers, and I start feeling like this fraternity start to build around me. And then I start telling Abel, like, I got to bring all of these guys with me. And he's like, well, we can't do that. Pick one. And I don't know who to pick. And so I go to the head of the novitiate, and I ask him to pick. And he picks Alex.
Oh, and that's how Alex ended up.
That's how Alex falls in. And so then they write a role for Alex. And then me and Alex wind up going to Italy.
He's in the film
He's
quite
in the
a
movie.
bit, actually.
Yeah, he's my right-hand man.
Right.
I mean, in life and in the film.
Yeah.
And what he brings with him is like, he's like a walking, I don't know how to describe him. He's my inroad into Catholicism. He was the guy who Eskimo'd me in, pretty much. And continues to be the guy who I can text him about anything, And he's also a really good mediator between me and my director. Because I'm not an expert in Catholicism, but I have one with me who's really good at being diplomatic with two creatives. He doesn't have this like energy. He has he's like water. I don't know how to describe it, but he's very diplomatic. And
so, I mean, by this time, you moved a long way from being on fire in that negative sense. When you said you were really
I'm not feeling that anymore.
Yeah.
Now I'm feeling like quite driven.
And I'm trying to let's name some of the moments. It was the way these guys included you in their community is one thing. It's
Yes.
reading the gospel.
Yes.
You started reading things like the Seven-Story Mountain.
Yes.
You're spending time in front of the Blessed Sacrament, right?
Jim Townsend, Brother Jim Townsend, also gave me permission as a sinner to feel like, well, I hadn't sinned like that, and he was a Capuchin, so it made me feel like, okay, well, me too. Like, I'm involved in this conversation.
Yeah.
It was seeing other people who had sinned beyond anything I could even conceptualize, also being found in Christ, that made me feel like, okay, well, that gives me hope.
Yeah.
And James said, hope is HOPE, hearing other people's experiences. And it's the truth for me. I started hearing experiences of other like depraved people who had found their way in this, and it made me feel like I had permission.
Classic form in the spiritual tradition, going back to people like Augustine, Augustine, he was lost. The same thing. I mean, he reached a point in his life. What he was obsessed with was fame. I mean, in a way, like you, he wanted a great career.
Yep.
He was this rhetorician. He wanted to be the speechwriter for the emperor, which indeed he became. And then that famous story, remember in the Confessions when he's going to accompany the emperor as he's going to recite one of Augustine's own speeches, and it was the high point of his life. And they run into this poor drunken guy in the street, was carrying on. And Augustine looks at him with disgust, and then he realizes, I mean, tomorrow he'll be sober, but I'm still going to be completely drunk on ambition.
Yeah.
And it led him down that same sort of hellish path until it was Ambrose. See, Ambrose for him was sort of like Father James or Brother Alex for you. There was this great bishop in Milan, and it was his preaching. And here Augustine went to hear him because he heard his rhetoric was impressive. I'm going to hear this guy. He's a great user of the Latin language. But as he listened to him, he's also preaching the spiritual life. Right? And so Augustine... and tears had a lot to do with it. Augustine was like a hyper intellectual, but man, there's like tears on every page of the Confessions.
Yeah.
And he starts weeping as he listens to Ambrose,
Yeah.
So that's a story from so many centuries ago, but it's your story in many ways.
Yeah, it is. And I'm experiencing a lot of that also, but also the weird thing is like separating what if this is actually happening to me for me, and what if this is like PO and this film and preparation and the separation. I'm before this movie, I'm chasing no separation, but here it felt even further. And there was a certain point where Abel's like asking me to do an accent,
Because you didn't do an accent.
No.
You just spoke in your American.
Yeah, because at a certain point, like I prayed on it, you
Yeah.
know, and I thought, this is the separation I'm not after. This feels like okay, now I'm just like wearing a mask, like a PO mask.
right.
Whereas it felt like the task wasn't that. The task, even beyond what the director was asking of me, and he found a way to find the same kind of, he found my reasoning just, was that I was having like genuine, while we were practicing Latin Mass, I was having genuine emotional experiences. And aside from the fact that, you know, as a Neapolitan speaker, his accent wouldn't have matched Italian anyway. But it felt like that would have taken me out of this thing that felt very personal. And so we didn't do an accent, because I felt like what was happening to me was like some kind of vessel. I'm not going to get too cheesy about it, but it felt like I wasn't in control of a lot of the stuff that was happening. There wasn't a whole lot of like emotional actor prep. It was like very prayerful. When I felt like I couldn't hit a moment, me and Alex we would pray, and then it would come, like the emotion would just come. Pio was a very emotional guy.
Yeah.
And Mass is very technical. It's so technical. And so it's very difficult. You have to be very proficient at Latin Mass, one. So I spent most of my time not even studying Pio. I just studied Latin Mass. So I went up to Oakland. I lived in Oakland, and just at the seminary in Burlingame, and then in Oakland. And I'm just going to Latin Mass all the time. And then after Latin Mass, I'm studying with the priests from the Christ the King, which is traditionalist Latin Mass, and I'm studying with them, but there's no emotionality with them. They're very like, it's like French Latin Mass, which isn't Italian Latin Mass. It's very like, it's just like stiff. Pio wasn't stiff. Pio was, like you say, he was almost a dancer. And so you're trying to like build this Mass that Pio is known for. It'd be like playing Dylan and not knowing how to play guitar. Like if you want to play Dylan, you don't just read Dylan biographies.
Right.
You have to pick a guitar up, and you have to learn how to play a guitar. And then the guitar needs to be your best friend. And then you need to sleep with the guitar. And then the guitar needs to be your only travel companion.
Yeah.
That's the way into Dylan.
Right.
The way into Pio was Mass. And it wasn't until I felt like I started having emotional reactions in Mass that I feel like I was anywhere near playing Pio. And Mass got very emotional, like really, really, really emotional. And then I felt like, okay, now I have permission to go study Pio. So then the Pio study started, and that took us to Italy. Then I started going to where he studied, in San Giovanni Rotondo, and you see it, and something was offsetting about it, because what I knew of Pio to that point was like, this is a man of deep humility who's offering up his suffering. And you walk into San Giovanni, and you see this big mosaic of this man, and there's pictures of him watching them build it. And my first inroad into what James was talking about, offering your suffering up and offering your ego up and entirely, is I always pictured a priest would be so against the idea that he's being put on this Mount Rushmore in this town. And what I'm seeing in this man is like deep utility, deep focus, like a man who's just so laser beam focused. He doesn't care if you think he's ridiculous. He doesn't care if the church thinks he's ridiculous. He doesn't care.
Which it did for a long time. That's part of the drama of Padre Pio, right?
Which was
As a
another
young
inroad
man,
for me.
Basically 10 years.
Exiled.
The church said, you know,
don't celebrate Mass.
Right.
Sit in this room.
And you know, by the end of his life, he's this living saint, and now he's this, you know, one of the great saints of the 20th century. But during his lifetime, he went through a real psychological and spiritual suffering.
With not much to lean on, other than like his a few spiritual advisors and people who he would celebrate Mass out of his window, because he wasn't allowed in the church anymore. Yeah. He wasn't allowed out of his room anymore. When you go to San Giovanni Rotondo, there's his room, and then there's a chapel, a small little chapel the size of this table that they built for him. There's like 5 chairs in there.
Yeah.
That's where he would celebrate Mass for like 10 years. And he would open a window and he would celebrate Mass, and he would hear the crowd outside. And it felt like this, you know, and not to minimize Pio, but or aggrandize myself, but this is another inroad for me where exiled, you're nuclear, you're a depraved individual, you're disgusting, we don't want nothing to do with you anymore. And I'm feeling that in Pio, because this is what the church said to him as well. You're doing it wrong. You're a no-no. You're persona non grata.
I think they weren't sure what to do with him. I think they were just thrown off. Like what is this?
Well,
and it took him a long time to figure him out.
When he claimed stigmata, the church at the time sent a bunch of rationalist, unbelieving people who thought miracles were impossible and we were beyond the age of miracles. And he's got his hands wrapped, and they're saying, "Let me see." And he's saying, "No." And then they write him off. "You're a liar.
Yeah.
You're a liar, and you're using the church to sensationalize and create a spectacle out here so you can sell keychains," or whatever they thought they was doing, you know? And so they write him off as a crazy, as a lunatic, a person who is pimping the church, is what they thought. And he had genuinely experienced something.
Which is true of a lot of the mystics too, that the church has a hard time taking them in at first, and it takes a while to figure them out. But no, I like how you're using that though as a way into your own life experience.
Because again, I'm feeling all this deep identification. Like here's another example of a man who, when he was exiled, he didn't hit Twitter.
Right.
He didn't go on Twitter and say, "I didn't do this, I didn't do that." He just got quiet.
Yeah.
He got quiet and he said, "Is that so?" And then he continued doing what served him and the people that he was serving. He didn't get loud. He didn't do the Martin Luther. He did the St. Francis, which was he quietly got more Christ-like.
Yeah.
And cultivated that, as opposed to like this rebellion.
He accepted it. Yeah,
he accepted
the judgment of the church.
Yeah, he could have started his own church, started his own order.
Right.
He had that much following. He
Right.
could have at that moment walked off into the woods and created a whole new sect of Catholicism.
Right. And there are a lot of people in the tradition who did things just like that. You know, probably mystics who had some legitimate sense of God, but they didn't keep communion with the church.
Yes.
You know? But let's go back to the stigmata for a second, because I don't want to give away too much of the movie, but it is featured in the movie that Padre Pio bore in his own body the wounds of Jesus, right? And you could say from a distant perspective, like, oh, wow, that's really something. It's kind of glamorous, you know? But he took it for what it was. I mean, this enormous suffering.
Yeah.
They hurt, you know, literally. These were wounds that hurt. And the idea is he was identified with the suffering of Jesus, which is a suffering that redeemed the world, you know?
Yeah.
And this very deep mystery is precisely through our pain very often.
Yeah.
That we find salvation, but also we become a vehicle of salvation to others, right? And so, I mean, you're talking about your own pain in your life.
This is why when I said to James, you know, he's like, "What are you good at?"
Yeah, right.
I'm like, bleeding in front of people.
Yeah, right.
And then I start looking at Pio. And it's genuinely what was going on. He's doing mass and he's bleeding in front of people. He's wrapping it up.
Yeah.
It's not a billboard, "Hey, look at my stigma." But I feel like this deep like identification with a Pio figure. And then I start looking at how he moved through the exile, which was to get quiet and cultivate more of the Christ in him. And that becomes my MO. That's modus operandi. And it's happening to me while I'm researching. And so I'm also getting friendly with people who knew him. You know, he becomes.
So you met some who actually knew him.
People
he dies
who were
about 1968, right?
Yes.
So these would be pretty old men.
Well, when you go to San Giovanni Rotondo, the fathers that are there now were confessing to Pio.
Wow. So when they were young guys, probably, right?
Yeah, and so you walk in and they're like, "You're Pio?" You know? And you're feeling all that too, you know?
You got a little bit of that?
Oh, yeah, they're sizing you up.
Yeah.
You're dealing with a person who, it's not just like their favorite baseball team, you know?
Right.
You're dealing with, it's big chips on the table. And then they walk you into his corpse.
That's right. So he's there.
Yeah. And it's overwhelming, you know? It's like the weight of it all, you know? You're standing with a dude who used to confess to this guy.
Yeah.
And this guy created all this. And you're in this town with the third biggest hospital in Italy that this man built out of nothing. This place, they used to grow radishes. Now it's got the third biggest hospital, a radiation center at the top. And, you know, they're studying cancer treatments. And it's like, you can't even fathom how much was done, how much got done in a very pragmatic sense, not in an esoteric hooty-doo way, in a very like feet on the ground, like it feels like lumber. It feels like you can hold it. And you're looking at this and you're feeling this, and again, I'm just feeling like this let go, like you got me, you know, and there feels like this, like I'm imbued with this thing. It doesn't require me to do much, you know, it just requires me to get out of the way. And so I just show up on set with that. And these guys are all on set. And now we're doing scenes and the guy who confessed to Pio is by the monitor. It does something. It does something.
Did he tell you anything that was helpful? Did he say, like, here's
he did.
something you should do?
He did. He told me he told me there was one time where he was confessing and there was a woman in the hallway who was wearing a dress that had her ankles exposed.
Yeah.
And he when he had somebody send her away. And he said, he told me about different teachers that he had in his life. The father who I was with was a little bit blind. He had vision problems. And he told me about this teacher who, in the seminary, he told me about two big teachers for him. One was a man who bought him really big books so he could see better.
Yeah.
And the other was Pio, who had failed him in his seminary. He used to teach the kids.
Oh, sorry.
Pio had teach the kids.
Yeah.
Pio would catechize the youth and walk them into postulancy. He was the one who was like man on the ground, dealing with the new recruits, as you would say. And they had a curriculum, and you could fail the curriculum if you didn't study.
So he was flunked by Padre
He was
Pio.
flunked by Pio, and this is a blind man, right? So, and at first he thought this is completely heartless. How do you flunk a blind man? And it was as if he heard Pio say, "You can do better."
Yeah.
And it motivated his life. He's now one of the head friars there, one of the most respected, most beloved old dudes in there. And he sort of also welcomes everybody in. He's, after Mass, he the same guy I'm talking about, he goes and walks into the laity and he raises his hands and they all come around him and they kneel around him in a circle and he prays for everybody. They love him. The whole neighborhood loves him. But he was the one who said, the two teachers that mattered to me was this really giving, soft approach that identified like my problem and like was soft with me, bought me the big books. And then there was this Pio influence, which was holding me to account.
He
and
was
had
tough.
he had certain ambitions. He was tough. To flunk a blind guy and tell him, you can do better.
Yeah.
It requires a certain kind of a person who can see more in you than you can even see in yourself. And so this is kind of the energy that he had. And so there's scenes in the movie that, with him cursing in confessional and stuff like that, James really loves. Father James loves those scenes because they introduce a certain...
He was tough in the confessional for sure.
Yeah.
That's well attested, right? They didn't take a lot of guff in the confessional.
No.
If someone's playing around like, Father, here are my sins, and Padre Pio knew, come on.
If you had come in 4 times with the same issue, he wasn't going to even listen to you anymore. He would just send you away, and you'd hear him yelling from confessional as you were waiting to go into confessional. And so as you're walking into confessional, he just let loose on another guy. This is the Pio style of doing things.
Tell me about, because now we're on this theme of the tough Padre Pio. A really striking element of the movie to me are the scenes where he's literally wrestling with the devil. And it's well accounted for in the stories of Padre Pio that his brothers would hear this like ruckus up in his room.
Yeah.
Things being thrown around and his body being hurled against a wall.
Yeah.
And it was, he was wrestling, he was struggling with the devil.
Well, broken fingers, bloody noses.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, he was in brawling all night.
Which I know would strike a lot of people today, I'm sure, is beyond bizarre, but you find it in the spiritual tradition like crazy, that people who are really close to God, the devil hates them and will go after them.
Yeah.
And, Padre Pio opened something up that was extraordinarily powerful, and I would say included someone like you. So you go back to 30-something, the young Padre Pio, or whatever, 1920. But God had you in mind. That Padre Pio would reach out to someone like you.
Right,
right. So my point there is, of course the devil hates that. He hates that. And so of course he's going to go after that, because that's a very powerful moment when grace is breaking into the world, right? And so I find that very plausible. The older I get, the more plausible I find that the devil, of course, wants to go after, even in a very direct way, those avenues of grace.
Which feels like a suffering hack. Because then you feel like, oh, okay, well, the suffering is actually a gift.
Yeah.
Like, you blessed me with this. When I think about, like, what's happened in my life this way, like, old me when I walked in was so upset about so resentful about the woman who accused me of all this. I wanted to go on Twitter and write all these things, and I wanted to justify this and explain all this. And now I actually see, like, the woman saved my life. She is, for me, a saint in my life. She saved my life. And that happened, that the perspective switch feels miraculous. What a spiritual experience for me is not like talking to a cloud, or like, when we talk about like the supernatural, in my life, it's a change in perspective.
Yeah.
That feels miraculous to me. There's no other way I could have done it on my own. So when I think about Pio and this fighting in this room, it feels like like, I can't account for his perspective in that room. I can't account for
Yeah.
it. It's his journey. It's his thing. And I think about, okay, well, what are my personal like fights? Was it physicalized? What and also did he? There's a question of whether like he is this him writing in parable form? You know, did he
Right.
genuinely? And I would ask the guys at San Giovanni.
What did they say?
It was a full-blown fist fight.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
See, the devil is usually more subtle because people at lower levels, you know, of a spiritual order, he tempts and he does all kinds of insinuating things. But I think with the great saints and the mystics, he's like, I'm coming at you.
Yeah.
I'm coming at you very directly. So
Yeah.
that doesn't really surprise me. There are a lot of stories like that in the great tradition, you know. And Padre Pio was, he opened up this avenue of grace that was extraordinary. So, of course, the devil hated him.
You can see it when you go. You see there's dents in his room, in the wall.
Right.
There's dents in the room,
Yeah.
in the wall. There's like blood marks on the wall. There's
Yeah.
still, you know, they have preserved this cell to such a degree that, I mean, that's another wild thing to walk into. They still have his heart in a crystal box. You know, this is really like, that's, I guess, another thing that I love about Catholicism. It takes me out of like all this cognitive, like I have to do this fairy tale make-believe, and it puts it right there, like I can touch it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't need to wonder whether a saint exists when I'm looking at his heart, when I'm looking at his, when you have all these talismans of like what, this actual like physical mana of what was there. For a person who's as caveman as I am in terms of I need a Polaroid picture, I need a Polaroid picture of God.
Yeah.
Catholicism offers it to me. You know, it gives me Polaroid pictures.
It's the incarnation, right? I mean, in Jesus, we find the face of God. And right, so the appeal to the mind, but also, I mean, to the heart, the body, the emotions, and then that's carried on through the great tradition for sure. And that's the saints, right? That's why we keep relics. I mean, it's a prolongation in a way of the principle of the incarnation, that the Word becomes flesh, and so in the flesh of the saints, you know. I mean, I've got a Padre Pio relic back in my chapel. You know, someone gave me years ago, and I mean, it's powerful stuff.
Yeah. This is the other thing is you start, like, I'm blessed to have had the experience I've had because once I met all the caps in Italy, then they introduced me to all the caps in Rome.
Yeah.
And then when you go to Rome and you go to the head of the order has a room that is full of relics, that is overwhelming. It's just, you cannot deny.
Did you go to the Bone Church in Rome?
Yes. Yeah, this type of stuff is like, it's just so effective. It's just so effective. It's really hard. And it's also like trying to describe it to my buddies over here. It's like trying to describe what pizza tastes like. I can't.
Right.
I can't describe to you what pizza tastes like. You got to either put pizza in your mouth.
No, but they'll see something in you, though. See, they'll see the change.
Exactly.
And so Jesus says, you know, metanoiete is his first word. You know, we say repent, but it means go beyond the mind you have. That's what it means literally. So nous is mind, meta is beyond. So he's saying go beyond the mind. And so the mind that we all get stuck in is this one of fill up the ego with all these things. You got to get beyond that mind. And as you put it, reach out, because the central theme of the Bible, you could say, Old Testament and New, is trust. Trust in the Lord. Because our word for that would be faith, you know. And before that means something more cognitive, it means something more visceral. It means trust. Let go, as you say, let go of all that old thing. Let go of that old self, which has made you miserable, right? And trust. The kingdom of God is at hand, Jesus says, and that means he's at hand. Here I am. Trust in me. Reach out to me, you know. And that's Christianity. I mean, that's Catholicism.
But it's so irrational to just trust.
Yeah,
You know,
right.
I can't just jump from nothing to faith.
Because I'm convinced I need all those things to be happy. And so I hang on to them desperately. If I let go of my career, or let go of pleasure, or I let go of power, whatever it is, I'm going to be lost, you know. But that sounds like Peter walking on the water. You know, as long as he's looking at the Lord, he's able to walk on the water. But you're looking around, you know, it's in the fear. You know, perfect love casts out not hate, the Bible says, but all fear, right? Perfect love casts out all fear. And that's a very important move. I'm afraid. I'm afraid to let go. Let go, perfect love, right? The love that comes from God and is directed back to God, casts out all fear. And then see, you start glowing with it. So you're not on fire the way you were describing, like in this hellish fire, but now you start glowing with this light, which is, I receive a grace and I give it. Instead of saying, hey, I got something, I'm gonna get more of that. No. What you get, give it, and then you'll get more of it.
It didn't make any sense to me that God comes to those who give. That's not what I was told before I came in. God comes. I came from the school of God helps those who helps themselves. Mm-hmm. That's what I was told. Yeah. And that's not what I found. God comes to those who give, those who ask. That's what I've experienced. I didn't do any of this. This is so when you talk about like what's your school of acting and stuff like, I don't know. I have no idea. I showed up for this movie, and there'd be scenes that we would be doing mass, and right before I would do mass, I'd turn to Alex and I'd say, "Brother, I love you," and he'd say, "I love you," and that'd be that. That'd be all the prep I need. Old me used to like live on a set. I would like live in a tank. Yeah. And I'd be living in the tank and like and doing all this extra blah, blah, blah. Because I was so scared that I wasn't going to get it right, that I didn't want to leave any room for error. I had no faith in anything other than my own will and my own efforts. And then you get to this set, it's you can only go so far, and then you really do have to have faith, because it's not like you're not playing anything you can actually rationalize. Action, you're fighting with the devil. What? How do you You have to have faith, because it feels so, and that's the other thing is like, it could get so corny. Mm-hmm. It could just get so garbage, and you're desperate to get it right. You're desperate to like protect this man's legacy. And I remember when I was, I had also been going to other Latin Mass in Van Nuys, like I'm quite close with Mel Gibson. And when I didn't know how to get to Latin Mass, I didn't know how to find it. You can't like go type it up online and find it. And he had introduced me to certain Latin Mass, which, because he's very into that traditionalist thing, you walk into like that realm, and you have people coming up to you once they know that you're playing Pio, and they start like coming up to you and tugging at your shirt sleeve and saying, "Don't get it wrong. Yeah. He's the only one we have." You start hearing things like that, you ship out with so much pressure that then you're in front of the Mass, and you've just gone through 6-7 months of the shirt tugging, the introduction to the order, the introduction to who Pio was, and you're standing in front of the Mass that he used to serve Mass at, and you're trembling with fear. And there's no way you can actually find the agency that he had, and you go through all this second guessing, that to have Alex with me rooted me in something very tangible and real. And when I turned to Alex and would say, I love you, it felt like God. This is really which really is God for me. Art isn't God for me, which is where I used to come from. Yeah. Art, love, and God being synonymous, but God and love are still synonymous for me. And the more loving that I am, the more I feel closer to God.
Well, that's what God is, right? So when art reflects Him,
yes,
the true, the good, the beautiful all reflect Him. But what He is love, and love is willing the good of the other. So that when you do that, you are in the presence of God. I mean, the divine life is surging through you when you truly will the good of the other, which is a very, very rare thing. Because we're so tainted by our ego that even as I think I'm willing that person's good, but probably there's a lot of, because I'll get something out of it, right? That's why those moments of when you can return to another human being and say, "I love you," or demonstrate that, that's a rare thing. That means God is in you, right? Now, give that away. Keep giving that away, and you'll get more of it, and you'll get more of it. And that's the saints live in that place. But
which is difficult on a film set.
Yeah, I imagine.
When the camera is on you.
Right.
It's so easy to get lost in ego when the camera is on you.
Right.
It takes extraordinary effort to get out. I mean, forget the camera for a second. I wake up in it. My left is my left, my right is my right. You are in front of me. It takes extraordinary effort, and it takes real work to get to another perspective. If I don't have a higher power, if I don't have God, if I don't have freedom, doesn't feel good with no structure. If somebody stripped me naked and threw me in the ocean, it wouldn't feel good. I'd be free, but I wouldn't enjoy it. This has given me structure to be able to enjoy my freedom, to be able to It's giving me purpose, the structure of it. I need the structure of it.
Bob Dylan, freedom just around the corner from you, but with truth so far off, what good would it do?
Well, let's go down the Bob Dylan route for a second.
Because I mean, see, he speaks a lot of these truths, you know, because Dylan comes out of that tradition. But that's exactly it. So we can so valorize freedom as like spontaneity. I do whatever I want. But with truth so far off, what good would it do? I mean, freedom is always correlated to
Can you say the lyric one more time?
Freedom just around the corner from you, but with truth so far off, what good would it do? That's from Joker Man. Remember that from like the early 80s?
No, you're a deep cuts Dylan guy. I'm like a big hits Dylan guy.
Oh yeah, I'm both. You know, I started loving Bob Dylan when I was about 13, and it was the concert for Bangladesh. Remember that?
No.
1971, George Harrison organized one of the very first benefit concerts. Now that's so commonplace, but it was like the first one for Bangladesh had gone through a great flood, right? All these people that were suffering. So he organized this concert. Everybody, Eric Clapton, Ringo, I mean, everybody at the time was there. And then the climactic moment was that he brought up Bob Dylan, who sang like 5 of his most classic songs. And he had been out of commission for a while. People hadn't seen him. And that was the first record I heard of Bob Dylan, was that performance. And it just, I was like 13 or 14, and it just changed my life.
Can I tell you Bob Dylan's story?
Yeah.
I made a movie called Honey Boy about my dad.
Yeah, right.
And Neil Young was a big deal for me and my dad.
Love
Neil Young.
Yeah.
And we didn't have like the budget. We were a small little like $3 million movie, really tiny film. And we didn't have like the money to pay for this Neil Young song that was a big deal for me and my dad. And I wrote this letter to Neil Young and asked him for the song, and he sent me a price tag that was exorbitant and would have been our whole budget. So then I reach out to my dad, and my dad plays me this Dylan song called "All I Want to Do Is," I don't know if that's called that, but it's
Baby Be Friends With You.
Baby Be Friends With You.
Yeah.
And I send the same letter to Dylan, and he gives me the song for free.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, for free.
Pretty good.
Yeah, for free. Nobody would do this. Nobody would do that. I mean,
Wow.
he's such a champion of the arts, like such a giving guy. I don't know if everybody knows that about Dylan, like the way that he moves in the industry or in business. Like he gives a lot of his music away to other like bubbling artistic endeavors. He just freely gives it away, which I think says a lot about who the guy is.
Well, he's not far from here. He lives in Malibu, you know. So
does he?
Yeah, that's where his main house is. I think he has a farm in Minnesota too.
Yeah, I picture him living in a chicken coop or something like that.
Yeah, he lives in a. Well, I think he does have kind of a strange pictures I've seen, like the environment around his house. It's kind of like a farm.
Got to be.
But I mean Bob Dylan, because the thing with Dylan, he does, I mean, so many different things and different styles, but he's someone that knows the spiritual tradition pretty well because he's biblical.
Yeah.
The Bible from the beginning to end, from the earliest stuff, Hard Rain and all that, all the way to today, is the Bible, I think, is the great golden thread that runs through his writing.
Well, and as a blues guy, you can't really get into Lead Belly and guys like that unless you're into the Bible.
Oh, the blues is all the Bible.
It's all Bible.
Yeah, and so that whenever you get into kind of Americana music like that, it's going to be the Bible is the thing. But see, people have forgotten the Bible, though. They don't know the Bible. The way people in the 19th century, or even like Dylan's generation, the first part of the 20th century, most Americans had a pretty good acquaintance with it. Now they don't.
What's the solution for that?
No, that's a good question. And I just finished a commentary on about half the Old Testament. And that's part of what I'm really dedicated to, is trying to make the Bible better known. And a lot of the preaching that I do, people say, well, it's remarkable because you're talking about the Bible so often. Well, what else would you talk about? But for a long time, we didn't. A lot of our preaching wasn't biblical. So I'm dedicated to, making that central.
Meaning you were encouraged not to talk Bible?
Kind of. We were encouraged to talk about people's experiences. So
in homilies?
Yeah. Like to say the Bible's kind of too heady, or it's too strange, or it's this distant thing. So talk about, your experience, how it relates to their experience, and maybe bring in a little something from the Bible. And that was a disaster. I mean, to be honest with you, like my generation was trained to preach that way, and it was disastrous. The Bible is so much more interesting than my experience.
Yes.
And when I bring my experience to the Bible, and say, well, my world belongs in that world. Right? My world should be drawn up into that world. That makes it more compelling, I think.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah.
I find that's, I guess, why traditionalist Mass hits me from a different angle. There's not like this relatable, like the homily doesn't like, okay, we'll let the like all the air goes out of Mass when that part of Mass happens. when we've done a very prayerful, we've entered, it's very prayerful, the initial prayers, and then we get to the homily and like there's this tss.
Right. Well, that happens when it's the priest's kind of own words and own experience dominating. Now, obviously they are my words, and of course my experience will influence it, but when that comes to dominate.
To let your hair down right before you're asking me to fully believe that we're about to walk through the death of Christ.
Yeah.
Seems like, huh?
They should be Christ's words, right? So the homily is an extension of the gospel, and it should be Christ's words that you're preaching. If it's Bob Barron sharing his private spiritual intuitions with you, well, then who cares? I might do that at a cocktail party or something. But at Mass, it's the prolongation of the gospel. That's what the homily is. But the irony is, the more I do that, the more compelling the preaching is, and the more it reaches people. If it's Christ's words, it's the Bible that dominates,
Yes.
Hey, listen, I could talk to you all day.
Yeah, I was just thinking that myself.
But thank you for being here, and it was just delightful. And my feeling, honestly, is Padre Pio from his heavenly place. Just as those Capuchins kind of took you in, up in San Lorenzo, drew you into their company and more deeply into their life. But see, we believe it's not just that company we can see, but the one that we can't see. And that company, too, of the saints reaches out to us, and I think played a role in drawing you in.
For sure.
And so you're playing Padre Pio. I see it as a result of his intervention, in your life from his heavenly place. So praise God for that.
Praise God for that. Thanks for letting me sit down with you.
All right. God bless you, Shia.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Peace.